devoted all of my adult life to this subject. I only debate with my equals. All others I teach.
The greatest fight.
We think that they are foolish to allow themselves to be beaten and brutalized and do nothing whatsoever to protect themselves. They are foolish. They should have the right to defend themselves against any attack made against them by anyone. If a dog is biting a black man, the black man should kill the dog. Whether the dog is a police dog, a hound dog, or any kind of dog. If a dog is sick on a black man, when that black man is doing nothing but trying to take advantage of what the government says is supposed to be his, then that black man should kill that dog or any two-legged dog who sicks the dog on.
Should other black men
Honorable Elijah Muhammad, number one, don't believe in any form of integration, and believe that every mention of the word integration by whites, whether it be from the mouth of Kennedy on down to the mouth of the lowest, raggediest white liberal in the street who is beatnik-like involving himself in these integration efforts, if we believed in it, we would integrate. And we would fight anybody who got in our way or made any effort whatsoever to stop us from integrating. If we really believe that the law of the land, the Supreme Court, and other
What it do? I'm back again. It's been a minute, man. Sorry it took me so long. Been kind of going through some things, have some health issues. What it do, Duck? Nice to see you, Brody. It's been a long time. Just getting back into the swing of things. Nice to see you, Brody. It's been a long time. All I can do, I can just do that like that. You know what I mean? So, excuse me. So yeah, today I'm back and I just want to go over some of these speeches, man. I'm probably late to the party, but every time I've tried to search for these speeches, man, I've never could find them. And I just always wonder what this man said because, you know, I've always heard that he was a great orator, you know, and somebody that can, you know, rile a whole country up like he did supposedly, because I never heard the speech, and get his people motivated behind the ideology that he had, and also in order to commit the atrocities that happened over there, he had to be a phenomenal speaker, right? So I was really wanting to take and look at it and see if why is it banned? Because really it's banned. I've even tried to get AI to translate these speeches myself in the past, and I never could do it. And now, with these new AIs and people building AIs themselves, they can get these speeches translated, and that they have done, right? So I just want to take a look at these speeches and see if it's, as bad as they say it is. Maybe we can find some good in it. I don't know. And I'm here to tell you that I don't support, any of his, genocidal opinions, right? I'm not for genociding the whole people. I will give my honest opinion on this ideology. Also, full disclaimer, I do not know if this video is accurate to what he was saying. I don't know. I haven't watched this video yet, and I hope somebody that's more have more historical context than myself, because it's been a long time since I've studied any of this guy. And I really don't want to say his name. I didn't put his name in the title. Well, I did, but I spelled it out. Hopefully they didn't catch it. I don't know if they have caught on to that yet, but if somebody that has more historical context of what was going on at the time. I've also heard that the U.S. backed both sides of the war at that time. I've seen some evidence of it myself. How much of it is true, I have no idea. But for what he did to that country, I am really interested. I'm a lover of history. So just even from that perspective, I would just like to see what it is that this guy was talking about. And maybe we can get some gems out of it. Or maybe he's just, as evil as some people say he is. Let's check it out.
Dear fellow Germans, a sudden commotion has come over the German people. Now even those circles are beginning to stir, which until now have been deaf to the constant warnings that we have been trying to address to the mass of our people almost without interruption for the past 3 years. Of course, many people still do not know why they are upset. They believe that perhaps it is only about so-called special privileges, or about the restriction of freedom of speech, or about the politicization of the civil service, and so on. Certainly all these are extremely serious matters. Today, however, it is about much more. It is about a huge process of destruction of our people and our fatherland. This is happening now before our very eyes. All these things would be trifles in themselves if they did not represent characteristics of a process which has been taking place for many years and whose end will be a horrible one. We can all sense that now two worlds are colliding with each other, and not only here, but everywhere we look. In the now oppressed Russia, in Italy, in France, and in England, etc. A relentless struggle between the ideals of the national-minded and the nebulous international. It is a struggle that now goes back almost 120 years. It began at the moment when the Jew received the right of citizenship in the European states. The political emancipation of the Jews was the beginning of a madness, for with it, one gave full civic rights and equality to a people which was racially much more clearly and abruptly demarcated than all others, which always formed and will always form a state within the state. Perhaps not all at once, but it went just as it does today, and as it always has gone. First a little finger, then a second and a third, and so bit by bit, until at last a people which still in the 18th century appeared to be completely alien, came to possess politically the same rights of citizenship as ourselves. And that's exactly how it went economically as well.
So from right now, what I gather he's saying, he's just talking about the usurpation of what he feels like is his nation by other people that don't belong to his nation. He says basically they're coming in, little by little at a time, and eventually, what he believes to be his nation won't belong to him or his people anymore. And then to give a little historical context, like, Germany is not the first people in history who have, um, kicked the Jews out of their country, just to be blatant. And I said the Jays, I meant to say the Jays. So just to give some context of it, like, just to be honest, can we just have that honest conversation that, they were not the first ones to just be like, we not messing with y'all, get out of our country, for the same reasons that this guy is expounding on right now. So they got a kind of a track record already, right, of this behavior. But yeah, let's continue. Just to keep some things in context.
The mass industrialization of the people meant the concentration of great masses of workers in the cities. Large crowds came into being, unfortunately not properly handled by those who had the moral obligation to take care of them. In parallel with this, however, there was a gradual monetization of the entire labor force. The share system came into being, and as a result, the stock exchange gradually became the conductor of the entire national economy. But the owners of this institution were and are, without exception, Jews. I say without exception because the few who participate in it as non-Jews are in the end nothing more than screens, token Christians who are needed to keep up the pretense to the broad masses that these institutions are natural to all peoples and their economies, while in reality they are institutions which correspond exclusively to the essence of the Jewish people, and thus also spring.
I want to run that back because I'm kind of writing about, how we have these institutions that we think are, a necessity for governance, right? And we also have this ideology that hierarchy is innate to humans, and I've always challenged that notion, right? And what people use to kind of perpetuate that idea, they'll say, look at your closest relatives, which are the primates. They say primates are a hierarchical mammals, right? They say they hierarchical. They got these hierarchical structure amongst themselves. But I can challenge the notion of that. I won't get too far into that, but that's one of the reasons why they say, humans are innately hierarchical. And I keep getting tongue-tied, but I don't believe that that's necessarily the case. But if we start off from there and we use that as the foundation, we think that it's okay to have these social systems as led from the top down, right? So if you accept that as part of human nature, then you won't have a problem. Then you won't have a problem accepting these types of structures that run your life. So I want to take it back a little bit.
Economically as well. The mass industry, one gave full civic rights and equality to a people which was racially much more clearly and abruptly demarcated than all others, which always formed and will always form a state within the state. Perhaps not all at once, but it went just as it does today, and as it always has gone. First a little finger, then a second and a third, and so bit by bit, until at last a people which still in the 18th century appeared to be completely alien, came to possess politically the same rights of citizenship as ourselves. And that's exactly how it went economically as well. The mass industry.
So I kind of talked about that on a show that I did before called "Is Nationalism Valid?" Right? And I even lost a few subscribers even asking the question, right? So the point that I'm talking about is that he has an issue with second-class people or foreign people having the same citizen status as peoples whose nation that it is. And I touched on that in America, and I asked a question that should white people feel some type of way when other people take over the power structure in a country that they believe that they built? Our country that they did build, a country that they did take? Do they have a right to feel some type of way? And people can feel however they want to feel, but the question is, if you build a nation, right, and you do it with people that are in your ethnic group, should you feel some type of way if you see other people come and now is running that nation, and then now it's not for the benefit of the people who you set the nation up for, right? So I think that is valid. I think that is very touchy grounds, right? Because everybody should be able to run their nation in the way that they see fit, right? But the way that you do it, is just gonna have to be right. And what is the right way? I don't know, but obviously he felt like he had an issue with people having the same citizen status as he did, and what is a man to say to that about another man's country that, he feels like he belongs to, help build, like, I don't know if necessarily help build, I should say that, but, belongs to indigenously, right? Right. His ancestors built it. And if you see other people come in, you might take that some type of way. Some people come in and try to, take it over. And take it over subvertly at that, because that's really what he's talking about.
Realization of the people meant the concentration of great masses of workers in the cities. Large crowds came into being, unfortunately not properly handled by those who had the moral obligation to take care of them. In parallel with this, however, there was a gradual monetization of the entire labor force. The share system came into being, and as a result, the stock exchange gradually became the conductor of the entire national economy. But the owners of this...
I don't know what he means by that. Like I said, if anybody want to jump in, you're welcome to jump in. I don't have a lot of historical context to put this in. I haven't studied Hitler in a long time. So if you have anything to contribute to kind of put some of the stuff he's saying in the context, you are welcome to come up.
This institution were and are, without exception, Jews. I say without exception because the few who participate in it as non-Jews are in the end nothing more than screens, token Christians who are needed to keep up the pretense to the broad masses that these institutions are natural to all peoples and their economies, while in reality they are institutions which correspond exclusively to the essence of the Jewish people, and thus also spring from it. At that time, Europe stood at a crossroads. It began to divide into two halves, Western Europe on the one hand, and Central and Eastern Europe on the other. Western Europe first advanced in industrialization. Especially in England, crowds of agricultural laborers, sons of farmers, or ruined farmers themselves, poured into the cities and formed a new fourth estate. But there is one important fact here, which many fail to take into account. England, like France, had relatively few Jews. The consequence of this, however, was that the great masses concentrated in the cities did not come into direct contact with this foreign nation, and the aversion which would necessarily arise did not find sufficient nourishment. Finally, the Jews of England, who at that time numbered scarcely 50 to 60,000, were able to Europeanize themselves with playful ease to such an extent that they remained hidden from the primitive eye of the common man, and he could not notice them.
So what I'll say about that is I share those same sentiments when talking about colonialism when I talk about Europeans. So he don't put Europeans and Jays in the same category. But I often say that same thing, when people colonize a people, they often subvert themselves into the society, right? They all sometimes they will marry into people and try to blend in, but still have ulterior motives, right? They may get into your political system, but really have no good intentions, right? They really want to get in and, take your wealth. You know what I'm saying? So if they have to marry into it, get into your political systems or what have you, this is part of colonialism. And he's saying these things about the Jays way back then, right? He's telling them that you have to be careful because these people are subverting institutions and blending into your society and acting like you in order to do this, right? He's making people aware of this. So I thought that was pretty interesting because I've also, said these things about, colonists.
As pillars of the economy, but especially as the bearers of great capital, they no longer appeared as foreigners, but as Englishmen themselves. This prevented anti-Semitism from gaining fundamental power in these countries. The same was true of France. Precisely because of this, however, it was possible to introduce in these countries the system known as democracy. Precisely in these countries, it was possible to establish a form of government that could mean nothing but the outweighing of intelligence and true energy by the sheer dead weight of the masses. In other words, it was possible there for the small class of Jewish intelligentsia, hidden in the British people, to manipulate the broad masses with playful ease in such a way.
Oh man, did he just say that, the Jays brought in democracy, which made it easy for them and their minority to manipulate the people in the society and the government, right? Because whenever you got this appearance of everybody having, power, but really don't, and that the masses are below average intellectually, especially people who, study their whole lives on politics, right? And economics and how nations are supposed to work, right? You have a foot up, so I could see that somebody coming in and bringing something like democracy that in appearance, it looks great. But if you're not adept in how it's supposed to work or what your alternative is, you could get duped.
Themselves. This prevented anti-Semitism from gaining fundamental power in these countries. The same was true of France. Precisely because of this, however, it was possible to introduce in these countries the system known as democracy. Precisely in these countries, it was possible to establish a form of government that could mean nothing but the outweighing of intelligence and true energy by the sheer dead weight of the masses. In other words, it was possible there for the small class of Jewish intelligentsia, hidden in the British people, to manipulate the broad masses with playful ease in such a way that the latter, unaware of whom they were obeying.
So I want you to think about that. He said the Jays were about 50,000 deep in France, but they had subverted themselves into the French culture, and people couldn't even identify them as Jays, right? Because Jays, for the most part, look like mostly other Europeans. If you're not really, paying attention and you don't care, but Jays tend to have this, ideology, right? What we call Zionism, right? So they have a loyalty, right? They have an agenda. So I think that's kind of interesting.
As democracy. Precisely in these countries, it was possible to establish a form of government that could mean nothing but the outweighing of intelligence and true energy by the sheer dead weight of the masses. In other words, it was possible there for the small class of Jewish intelligentsia, hidden in the British people, to manipulate the broad.
Another thing to think about, and I think Tucker Carlson have an interview. I forget who he was interviewing, right? But he was bringing up the point, isn't it like against government's interest to put J people in power if they have a Zionism agenda, right? If a Jew is loyal to, something else, then why would you put them in your government whenever their loyalty lies to another into another nation, right? It really don't make sense. It's kind of like you'll be shooting yourself in the foot, right? Especially at a time when these people don't have a nation of their own, right? These people have always been trying to get some land, and they did end up getting it. So, you just have to take these things in consideration, and then you have to take the whole thing into context because they did end up getting that land, right? Yeah, what I'm saying? Like, how would you feel if it was you and some people came and like subverted themselves into your culture with the agenda and with the allegiance to another place, and they were like, outsourcing your goods or just exploiting your people? I'm not saying that that's necessarily what's going on. I'm saying that this is definitely a possibility given the ideology.
Masses with playful ease in such a way that the latter, unaware of whom they were obeying, served the purposes of this small class. There, with press propaganda and control of information, it was possible to found the prototypical large parties. Even back then, there were always 2 or 3 groups that appeared to be fighting.
I find that really interesting. At that time, he's saying these people are controlling the media and propaganda, right? It's easy for us to say that now in 2025, but back then, right? You got someone in power complaining about these people controlling the media and propaganda back then, and it's the same thing we say now. Interesting.
Against each other, but in reality, we're all hanging on a gold thread, and everything was adjusted to a peculiar human characteristic. That man gets tired of something he has had for a long time. He wants something new, and so 2 parties were needed. One of them rules, and the other one forms the opposition. When one party is played out, the opposition party comes to power, and the played out party now takes its turn as the opposition. After 20 years, the new party becomes played out, and the game repeats itself anew. In reality, this is certainly an ingenious mill in which the interests of a nation are ground down. As is well known, such a thing.
So he just gave his gripe on a 2-party nation, which we call ourselves. And I have the same gripe. I believe that this is a 2-party nation in appearance, right? The 2 parties complement each other. They're really not adverse. They're really one and the same. They differ in small things, but the big things, people are on the same team. So he's having a lot of the same objections to what the objections that I have to this day in the present. So it's crazy.
Is called self-government of a people. In the process, we always find 2 main buzzwords, freedom and democracy, as figureheads. Freedom is understood to mean, at least among the authoritative bodies that actually govern, the possibility of plundering the broad masses without limits or resistance. The masses themselves, of course, believe that freedom means the exercise of a very particular freedom of movement, both freedom of movement of the tongue and freedom to move about the streets, etc. A bitter deception. On the whole, we can say that England as well as France put on the chains of slavery already back then. With a bronze firmness, these states are in Jewish chains, as long as the Jew himself does not feel the necessity and expediency of a change in this condition. This change will also occur there in the foreseeable future. Now, what is the difference between this Western Europe on the one hand and Eastern and Central Europe on the other? Here, industrialization did not happen as quickly. The masses streamed more slowly from the static countryside into the cities. Only slowly did the large cities develop here, and it took a long time for a 4th estate to form in Germany as well. In addition to this, there was the fact that
I wonder what he means by the 4th estate.
Both in the East and in Germany, the presence of the Jew was constantly felt by the broad masses because of his greater numbers, so that the whole people had an inner instinctive aversion to him among all classes, but most of all the peasant, the worker, and the honest petty bourgeois. On the other hand, a part of our own aristocracy and a certain circle of merchants, to whom money and gold are everything, were the most quickly corrupted. If political contamination was already more difficult because of the large number of Jews and the consequent aversion of the mass of our people, the difficulty was increased by a form of government which did not place ultimate authority in the hands of a weak-willed and irresponsible so-called majority, but which was traditionally anchored in a personal apex, the monarchy. At that time, the Jew had to admit to himself that in these countries the resurrection of an enlightened despotism would by no means be impossible. There were 3 powerful factors at the disposal of the head of state: the army, with a huge, wonderfully well-coordinated officer corps; the body of civil servants with its enormous apparatus of completely dutiful officials; and a great broad mass of people who were inwardly still free from any poison. And if we add to this the fact that at that time the national intelligentsia in Germany was still almost exclusively predominant, that even wholesale trade was still in German hands, that above all, the young, flourishing, rich industry was of German origin and German ownership, and that further, the enormous peasantry, the last reservoir of a nation's strength, was still completely uncontaminated and healthy. We understand the following consideration of the Jewish people, who at that time were gaining political equality, when, through industrialization, a new fourth estate is formed in the cities. There is a danger that this fourth estate will fraternize with the monarchy, and that, on this basis, a people's kingdom or people's empire will come about, willing and ready to deal the death blow to the international financial powers. Therein lay a grave danger for Jewry. If the broad mass of the then forming labor force had come into national hands, and had then seized the nation as a true social catalyst, if the liberation of the individual estates had taken place organically step by step, and if the state form had later been based on this, then what many hoped for on November 9th, 1918 would have come about, a national social state. For socialism as such is anything but an international creation. As a noble conception, it has grown exclusively.
You guys remind me to look that up. What does H mean whenever he says National Socialism? I mean, I know what the terms mean, but sometimes people use them in specific context, and I wonder what he meant exactly by a National Socialist Party.
Exclusively in Aryan hearts and reaches its intellectual apotheosis only in Aryan minds. It is completely foreign to the Jew. He will always and forever be the born private capitalist of the most exploitative kind. And it is no coincidence that the great pillars on which some later mistakenly tried to build the foundation of a so-called People's Enlightenment were all without exception opponents of the Jews.
So right now, it just seems like it's a battle of ideology. He's against capitalism. He said he liked the monarchy, right? And whenever you get rid of the monarchy, you can instill this so-called democracy, and then people are more easy to manipulate, right? And if you have a big a consolidated group, he said that they had a consolidated group of 50,000 people in somebody else's country, right? In France. I don't know how true that is, but that's what he said. But think if you got people like the J people who are on the same accord, working as a unit, break down your monarchy, perpetuate or stand up this democracy, but all the indigenous people, right? All the native people are, dispersed. They're on different sides. They're on different sides of the board. But the Jays are, consolidated. They got a group. They got, they all on the same accord. They move on code, what we like to say. That's dangerous.
Voltaire and Rousseau, as well as our German Fichte and many others, they all, without exception, had been united in the realization that the Jew is not only a foreign body, different in his whole being, which is entirely harmful to the Aryan, but that Jewry as a people for itself stands against us and will stand against us as a mortal enemy, always and for all time.
Now, whenever I hear rhetoric like that, I don't like that rhetoric. We all don't like that rhetoric, but I always have to contrast it with what was going on over here in the States with, what happened over here, right? We don't have to get into it deep, but I'm just saying, like, we demonized Hitler for that ideology, but that ideology was over here too. People may not think that we were their mortal enemies, but they also always felt like they were superior to us and we were lower than them and didn't have the same status, didn't have the same God-given rights. And it seems as if Hitler has that same ideology and principle.
Jewry has made a politically truly ingenious step. This capitalistic people, which first brought the unscrupulous exploitation of human beings into this world, knew how to take the leadership of this fourth estate into its own hands. The Jew became the founder of the social democratic and communist movements, and with extraordinary skill, he gradually played the leadership exclusively into his own hands by two methods. One he used on the right, the other on the left, but he had his apostles in both camps. On the right, he endeavored to exacerbate all the existing problems by emphasizing as much as possible those qualities which were repugnant to the man of the people, the poor devil, so that the latter would be incited as much as possible. It was he who increased and drove the greed for money to the extreme.
So these speeches have been banned and hidden for a long time. It's hard to find them translated here in America. I don't know about in other places, but with rhetoric like this, like how critical he is of the two-party system, which is our system. You know, we love democracy. We used to love the republic, right? And how he is putting a light on how it's only that in appearance, right? And how you can put your people on both sides of the party and work together, right? And the dumb people, the dumb masses wouldn't know nothing of the difference, right? And he's kicking this stuff off back then. It's interesting.
He was the one who preached unscrupulousness in the use of any and all means as a matter of course in business dealings, and by his competition forced the others to join in. He was the one who pushed hard-heartedness in the ruthless use of these means to such an extent that the saying, business too marches over corpses, became self-evident. But it was he in particular who increased gaudiness in the most disgusting form, to such an extent that it could only become a grave insult to the broad masses. While he thus corrupted the people on the one hand by his evil example, he destroyed them also in terms of blood. More and more Jews wormed their way into the families of the upper classes, and it was from the Jews that these families took their wives. The consequence of this, however, was that in a short time,
There's actually a movie about that type of behavior. You know, and it has some history in it from like where I'm from, Oklahoma. And it's called something of the moon, something of the wildflowers. I can't remember off the top of my head. There's a great documentary and a great book on it, but it's about how the Native Americans got pushed into Oklahoma, right? Well, they got pushed to a couple other places prior, right? But then once white people seen that the land was resourceful, they would come in and kick them off. So they had did this to the Native Americans a couple of times. They say, "No, you guys can't be here. This is ours, but go over there," because they thought the land was barren. And they'll go over there, and then they'll start being, you know, bring the land back or find some type of resources. And here come the white men again. Now we're taking this. So finally, they put them somewhere and said, "We know this land ain't about nothing." And what happened? These people struck oil, right, and became the richest people per capita, either in the world or in the United States. And you know what happened? This is part of the reason why the FBI got founded, I believe, right? Is because white people came and started subverting themselves into people's family, marrying themselves into people's families, and then killing them off, deleting them, right? Marrying somebody and then the Native American woman having an accident. Because why? Because now the husband gets to inherit the wealth, right? That's exactly what this guy is talking about.
The leading stratum of the nation became completely alienated from its own people. All of that was the prerequisite for his work on the left side, and he exploited these prerequisites brilliantly. And he succeeded further by ingenious use of the press to influence the masses so much that the faults of the left were seen by the right as the faults of the German worker, and the faults of the right appeared to the German worker as the faults of the so-called bourgeoisie. Neither of them noticed that the faults of both sides were the intended result of malicious foreign incitement. And only in this way does it become comprehensible that history's bit of staircase wit could occur. That stock exchange Jews became leaders of a German workers' movement. And in all this, one can see how they work together so wonderfully. The stock market Jew and the workers' leader, the Financial Times and the workers' rag. They both pursue one direction and one goal, whether Frankfurter Zeitung and Münchner Post, Berliner Tageblatt and Rote Freiheit or Rote Fahne. They operate wonderfully together. While the company attorney Moses Cohn stiffens the resolve of his company so that it faces the demands of its workers as rigidly as possible, that is, intransigently, his brother, the workers' organizer Isaac Cohn, is in the factory yard stirring up the masses. Look at them, they just want to oppress you, throw off the chains, etc. And above, his brother helps to forge these chains in the first place. On the one hand, the Financial Times is eager to awaken the incessant addiction to speculation. Speculation on the crops and foodstuffs of the people proliferates in an unprecedented way. On the other side is the workers' rag, riling up the masses by telling them, bread has gotten more expensive, and this and that have gotten more expensive. Don't tolerate it anymore. Arise, proletarians, down with so-and-so. This process is practically complete in Russia. The whole of today's Russia is nothing more than a ruined culture and a mature colony to be cultivated by foreign capital, which must nevertheless draw in Aryan minds as practical laborers. For the Jew is not fit for this either. Here too he is only rapacious and gluttonous. He knows no orderly economy and no orderly body of people. He steals everything over there in Russia. They take the diamonds away from the noblemen to help the people. But then the diamonds disappear into foreign companies, never to be seen again. He seizes the wealth of the church, but not to feed the people, no. Everything wanders away and disappears without a trace.
Very, very interesting, right? I find that interesting because you could say the same thing about our nation in Fort Knox, right? I don't know if it's true, but they say the gold is not in Fort Knox anymore, and no one knows where it is, right? You could also say that about taxes, right? We don't get to audit the government on taxes. We have no idea where this money is going. I don't think that should be so in a democracy. I believe everything should be audited, whether it be voting, assets, everything should be transparent in a democracy, right? If it's not transparent, then it's not for the people. And if we can't audit it, then I don't want it.
He has become completely irrational in his greed. He cannot preserve anything. He has only the drive for destruction in him. Once he has destroyed everything, he will collapse along with that which he has destroyed. It is a tragic fate that has struck the people of the northeast of our fatherland. In the past, we were often supposed to get upset about some bandit who received his just punishment here or there. When an anarchist was put up against the wall in Spain, there was a great howl in our country about this sacrifice of the most precious human blood. When a Max Holz is brought before a court of justice in our country, the so-called German press never tires of reporting in long articles exactly how he, as the apostle of a higher conviction, is being unfairly condemned. And if a stock exchange bandit is hanged somewhere in Hungary, then that is enough to boycott that whole state. Yes, there must be a boycott, because this state has a human life on its conscience, and we are so infinitely sensitive. Today, however, more than 30 million people have been slowly martyred to death in the East, some on the scaffold, some by machine guns and similar means, some in actual slaughterhouses, and millions through hunger. And we all know that this wave of hunger is creeping on. It is all lies and deception, what is declared about the aid delivered there. What does aid mean when on one side there is this greedy werewolf who eats up all this aid himself? They'll call you a reactionary, a monarchist, and a pan-Germanist if you criticize today's conditions. I ask you, what would be the state of Germany if there had been no criticism for 3 years? I think that in reality, there has been far too little criticism. Our people are unfortunately far too uncritical. Otherwise, they would not only have seen through many things long ago, but would have shut them down with their fists. Thus, the crisis is reaching its climax. The day is not far off when the German Revolution will have to be pushed forward for the reasons mentioned above. The leaders know too well that it cannot go on forever as it is today. It will be possible to raise prices 10 times by 100%, but it is questionable whether the Germans will accept 1 billion marks a day in salary, only to starve to death at the end of the day. It is questionable whether one will be able to maintain this great deception.
Like I said, I'm missing a lot of the historical context, so I can't really weigh in on a lot of the things that he's saying, because he's given context from different countries of what different countries is going through, what his country is going through at that time, which I have, a little knowledge, but I wouldn't speak definitively on it, right? So it's just kind of interesting for him, listening to him, give his, little synopsis or his critiques on what's going on in those times. And another thing I find interesting is that I thought his speeches was going to be filled with like hate speech. Like that's what I was anticipating. I was anticipating him saying, F the J, we must delete them all, because he's talking so passionately. And I apologize for not having a AI translation that sounds more like him, because they do have the ones that sound like him, but the ones that sounds like him, those ones are really eerie. They'll give you goosebumps, right? But I could only find clips of his speeches were the ones that actually sound like him, right? So I had to settle with this one to where they're longer, right? So we can have a little bit more to commentate on. But yeah, I just thought it was going to be filled with a lot of hateful rhetoric, and I just don't hear it, right? He has taken some shots. He has said some derogatory things, but not much, though. He's just, he's just saying how he feels about what's going on in the climate at that time, the political climate, right? He's adverse to people coming into his country and taking it over, right?
Of the nation, the day will come when it will not be possible. And that is why we have to make provisions. And so Germany is now entering that stage whose extremes Russia has already felt. Now, in a last grandiose push, the criticism and resistance, nay, the honesty that is still present in us, is to be crushed. And this will happen all the faster, the more they see that one particular insight is beginning to take hold of the masses, the National Socialist doctrine. Whether under ours or another name, more and more it gains ground everywhere. All these people cannot yet be in a party together, but wherever one goes in Germany, indeed almost in the whole world, there are already millions of thinkers who know that a state can only be built on a social basis. And secondly, that the mortal enemy of every truly social idea is the international Jew. Every truly national.
That's a big statement. He's saying that every system must be based on some type of social system, right? To be a real state. I'm not too political minded, but I'm a fan of socialism, right? But everybody demonizes it, right? Whenever you talk about socialism and, communism and these things to where people are more equal, and they always point out the things like you're not having like property, and you're not having like you're not being able to accumulate wealth. I don't think those things are necessarily that bad, because whenever I look at ownership and stuff like that, like all the things that I have, like my house I can't take with me, my car I can't take with me, like my stuff is just stuff. Like whenever I was a kid, I was like real, real keen on having a lot of things, but I'm not that way anymore. But whenever people look at that, they don't look at it in a realistic way. When people talk about not having ownership, that don't mean that somebody can just come in your house and just like take your things with it. I guess the state probably could, but the state can't now, right? You will still like own your things, but it's just like, big things, I suppose, right? I wouldn't set up my version of socialism that way. And I don't think people believe that you can have different degrees of, socialism, right? I don't like the fact that whenever people bring up these different systems, they only point out the seemingly negative aspects of it, right? Compared to the overwhelming benefits that they could have also. Yeah.
Thought is ultimately social. That is, whoever is ready to stand up for his people so completely that he really knows no higher ideal than the welfare of this people. Whoever has grasped the meaning of our great song, Germany, Germany above all, in such a way that nothing in this world is higher to him than this Germany, people and country, country and people. He is a socialist. And he who sympathizes with the poorest of this people's citizens, who sees in each individual a valuable member of the whole, and who recognizes that the whole can only flourish when it is not composed of rulers and oppressed, but when all.
So you could substitute socialist with American, democracy and still feel the same way, right? That's just a patriotic attitude. You know, I believe everybody wants to put their country, you know, first. You know, if it's between you and another country like starving, of course you would want to deal with your people first, right? So I don't think that's necessarily a negative thing, but you know, people can always put these things in a negative context when people are patriotic or have a nationalist position. And you know, nationalism can be a negative, but it doesn't have to be, right?
According to their ability, fulfill their duty to the fatherland and the national community, and are valued accordingly. He who stands for the preservation of the strength and youthfulness of the millions of working people, and he who above all stands up to ensure that our most precious asset, our youth, is not prematurely used up in unhealthy, harmful work. He is not only a socialist, but a nationalist in the highest sense of the word. But it is the teaching of this insight which appears as the most threatening danger to Jewry, as the leadership of today's revolutions. And it is precisely this danger that pushes him to strike as quickly as possible. Because he knows one thing for sure. In the end, only this young movement can threaten him. He knows the old parties. They are easy to please. A few endowments in the form of ministerial chairs and similar posts, and they fall in line. He knows one thing above all. They are so simple-mindedly stupid. Every day they prove correct the saying that he whom the gods would destroy, they first strike blind. They are struck blind, and so the gods must want to destroy them. Yes, just look at these parties and their leaders, Stresemann and whoever else. They are truly harmless. They do not grasp the root of the problem. They all still believe that they can fight a battle, which is a battle like none other in this world, through leniency, humanity, and compliance.
I agree with that. I believe we have a lot of puppet leaders, and I believe that there's a lot of people out there that think you can, like, they'll say the best thing you can do to evil is show them love. Nah, you can't win a war loving people, man. You know what I'm saying? You can't be merciful to people who's trying to, you know, do ill will to you, right? And you know, it's from a good place, but in reality, just things don't work like that. And I understand that not everybody has the heart to do harm to people, even if someone is trying to bring harm to them. I see it all the time. Not everybody has the heart to be preemptive, right? To strike somebody before they strike you. You know, a lot of times people are reactive, but in war, you can't be reactive, right? If you know that your country is on the brink of being overtaken, you can't let it happen and then try to come out of it. No, you have to stomp it out, right? If you know it's coming, you should not react, but be proactive, right? And I'm not taking sides here. I'm just talking about, you know, the strategy of the logic, right? The ideology. So I agree with what he's saying there.
Through leniency, they believe they can show the opponent on the left that they are willing to compromise in order to stop the deadly cancer somewhere in the middle. No, and 1,000 times no. There are only two possibilities, victory or defeat. We know that the so-called law for the protection of the Republic coming from Berlin today is nothing more than a means of silencing any criticism. But we also know that they will now try by all means to make the last minds who see disaster approaching in Germany disappear in time. That is why the population of northern Germany is being whipped up against Bavaria by means of lies and distortion. They have the feeling up there that in one corner of the Reich, the German people are not yet broken. And that is where we National Socialists have to intervene. We National Socialists are...
I used to know what Hitler meant by that. I don't think it's the traditional view of today what we think National Socialism means. I have to look that up when this is over. I actually want to look it up right now, but I don't want to, you know, get distracted from the video, from the speech. But what does Hitler mean by National Socialism? If anybody knows, drop it in the chat or jump in and comment on it.
Are by God the most loyal supporters of our German fatherland. In 3 years, we have fought a battle, sometimes against death and the devil, but always and only for our German fatherland. We have come so far that in the end we landed in prison ourselves for our efforts. But there is one thing we want to say. We distinguish between the German government and the German fatherland. If some half-Asiatic scoundrel here in the Landtag or in the Reichstag in Berlin accuses us today of not being loyal to the Reich, I would ask you not to grieve over it. The Bavarian people has proven its loyalty to the Reich with its countless regiments.
I think that that's interesting. He said they make a distinction between the land and the government, because in some places, whoever's the land belongs to the government, you know what I mean? And monarchies and stuff also. And you would think in a National Socialist system, you would too. But he said there's a distinction between the land and the government, but I wish he would have elaborated on that, on what he means.
Which fought for the Reich and were often buried 2 or 3 times under the earth. We are convinced, and this is ultimately our only great faith, that the German Reich will once again rise out of this most bitter misery and all this hardship, different from how it exists now, not as a birth of misery and wretchedness, but that we will once again have a true German Reich of freedom and honor, a real fatherland for the entire German people, and not a haven for foreign crooks. Today, people speak incessantly about.
I think that that's interesting also. I've never heard anybody refer to their land as the fatherland, right? It's always the motherland, the motherland. But he's referring to Germany as the fatherland. I think that's pretty interesting. It just sounds super patriotic. Patriarchy. I was going to say patriotic, but like patriarchy, right?
Federalism, etc. I beg you, don't rail against the Prussians while groveling before the Jews, but show yourselves stiff-necked against those now in Berlin. And if you do that, you will have millions and millions of Germans behind you throughout Germany, whether they be Prussians, Badeners, Württembergers, Saxons, or Austrian Germans. What we did not fear at that time, but rather foresaw, because I never said that it could come, but always that it would come, because it must come, and there is no way around it, has now come to pass. Because we foresaw this at the time, we resisted, and because we foresaw that today our task would not be complete, but that this too is only another step on the way into a morass of blood. We now ask you one last time, remain stiff-necked now and resist the last. We National Socialists, who for 3 years now have done nothing but preach, insulted and besmirched by all, mocked and ridiculed by some, blasphemed and slandered by others, we cannot go back. For us, there is only the one straight path. We know that the fight that is about to begin will be a hard one. It will not be fought out in the Reich Court in Leipzig, nor will it be fought out in a Berlin cabinet. It will be fought out by those real factors that have always shaped world history up to now. I heard a few days ago in a ministerial speech that the rights of a state could not be eliminated by simple majority decisions, but only by treaties. Bismarck had something slightly different to say about this. He said that the fate of nations could not be determined by majority decisions, nor by treaties, but only by blood and iron. There should be no doubt about it. We National Socialists will not let Jewry cut our throats without fighting back. In Berlin, they might organize dinner parties with the Jewish executioners of Soviet Russia. Here, they will never do that. They may today begin to set up the Cheka, the Extraordinary Commission, in Germany, and let it operate freely. We will never submit to such a Jewish commission. We have the rock-solid.
I've never heard anybody really discredit his rhetoric, right? For one thing, it took a long time for his speeches to become translated into English, man. I remember when I was young, you could never find them. But when have you ever seen anybody do a video or say Hitler was just absolutely wrong about the things that he was accusing the Jews of? And I said it again, the J's of. I've never seen nobody say he was wrong, right? They always talk about the actions that he committed on the people, which we can all agree was wrong and extreme, right? But as far as what he was saying that the people were doing to his nation, I've never heard no one say that he was wrong about those things, right? It's just always what he did.
But conviction that if 7 million people in this state are determined to stand up for their no to the last, then the evil specter over the rest of the Reich will collapse into nothingness. For what Germany needs and longs for today is a symbol of power and strength. So, at the end of my speech, I have to make a special request to those of you who are young. There is a very special reason for this. The other parties train their boys in mouthing off. We would rather train them physically. Because I'll tell you this, the boy who does not find his way to where the fate of his people will ultimately be decided, who only studies philosophy and sits behind his books or at home behind the stove, he is not a German boy. I call upon you, join our storm divisions. No matter what slander and calumny you hear about them, you will know that they are formed for our protection, for your protection, and thus not only for the protection of the movement, but for the protection of a future Germany. And if you are blasphemed, and if you are besmirched, then hail to you, boys. You already have the good fortune to be hated at the age of 18 and 19 by the worst scoundrels. What others have to fight for, this highest good of distinguishing the honest man from the bandit, falls into your lap as a bit of good luck in your youth. Be confident that the more they slander you, the higher you will rise in our esteem. We know that none of us could speak if it were not for you. We know and see that our movement would be crushed if you did not protect it. Today you are the defense of a movement that is called to revolutionarily transform Germany from the ground up.
I mean, it's taken, listening to AI say it like this, it's taking a lot of the intensity out of his speeches, because you know, whenever you see him live speaking, this man is lit, right? So to hear AI say it in his monotone doesn't help, you know, the emotion that he's putting behind his words, right? But I'm just trying to imagine him saying this to, you know, having many thousands of people, but him really just getting it in. So if you keep that in mind, that he's really getting off on these speeches, you'll kind of hear it in another way, and how it could be touching somebody's soul to move in the way that he wants them to move, right?
So that what so many expected on November 9th may come to be a German Reich, a Germanic, and for our sake, a German Republic. Every battle must be fought to the end. Better that it comes sooner rather than later. And the one who goes into the fight with the most confidence from the start stands the most secure. And this highest confidence we can carry in our hearts, for whoever is the leader of the German people on our side today, by God, has nothing to gain, but everything to lose. He will have one great guarantee. Whoever fights for us today cannot win great laurels at present, much less great wealth. Rather, he is likely to end up.
Is this guy talking off the top of his head, or is he reading speeches? I don't remember this guy ever like looking down, reading anything. I just remember this guy standing on a podium, just getting it in. And from what I have watched, if he is just flying off the top with this rhetoric like this dude is a tremendous orator, tremendous. So I just wonder if he's reading or if he's just coming off the heart, man. Because if so, that's a great talent to do, because he has given a lot of historical context, you know, going into, you know, patriotism, why you should be patriotism, what you should guard against, who are the so-called enemies, and all this type of stuff. You know, it's not a dumb guy, really not.
In prison. Whoever is a leader for us today must be an idealist, if only because he leads those against whom everything seems to conspire. And finally, take this one assurance with you. If this fight were not to come, Germany would never get peace. It would languish and at best finally perish as a rotten corpse. But we are not destined for that. We do not believe in the downfall of our people. We believe that the disaster which today our Lord God sends upon Germany is the scourge which will whip us up to a new greatness, to a new power and glory, to a Germany which for the first time shall fulfill what millions of our best through centuries and millennia have inwardly hoped for, a Germany of the German people.
All right. So I'm kind of, I really don't know what to say. I really don't. Because I really expected to be full of just hate speech. I really did. And I didn't hear a lot of hate speech. Did he say a few hateful things? Yes, but I thought it was going to be full of hateful rhetoric. Whenever you see the intensity that he's speaking in these speeches and how they have the speeches banned, you think he's just being like, you know, delete the J's, genocide the J's, F the J's. Like that's what I'm thinking, right? For him to like just ban the speeches and not let them come out for like years. But it wasn't none of that. He was actually articulate. He was actually, knowledgeable. He was actually passionate, and he had some of the same points. He make some of the same accusations that we make to the Jays today, which is I'm completely surprised to hear. So that was a really interesting speech. I'll probably do another one tomorrow too. I think I maybe have like 10 more of them. I really want to find the ones to where he's live giving it and it's like translated into English and it's still in his tone because his tone is crazy, right? And listening to that, I can see why people followed him, right? Because we look to the past and we say, man, how did those people, put up with all that nonsense that was going on, like the genocide, like how did people like participate in that? But whenever you hear the rhetoric, like if that's what was going on, right? And if that's how people felt, then I can see why, right? Not saying that it's right, not saying that I agree with it. I don't even know if that's the real narrative that was going on at the time, but talking like that and being super passionate, right? I can see Rob, man. This dude is a great orator. Now, I'm not so sure if he's a great leader, and I've heard some different nonsense about him. They're saying the man was on meth. Also, some people say he was a Christian, right? And he talks about how, God is on his side and God is on their side, right? And I imagine holding that position, right? And being against the so-called Jays, who also believes the same thing, right? And then you even hear America displaying the whole rhetoric, right? You make an enemy and say God is on your side, right? We do it with so-called terrorists all the time, right? We create an enemy, right? Label them as a terrorist, right? And say, we in God's country. But don't every country believe that they in God's country, even Islamic countries, right? Even the Germans, they Catholics. He's talking about these token Christians. Like everybody think they are the heroes in the story. Everybody does, right? But who is? Even here in America, we think we're the heroes. And we go about it. We go about the world like we're the heroes, right? Going around the world. Establishing democracy, right? That nobody asked for, that everybody think that they want at the same time, but don't even necessarily know what it is. They just know it's better than what they have, quote unquote, right? Because it looks good, but then all your wealth gets subverted. So I just thought it was wild, man. I really did. I mean, I enjoyed listening to him, and I really don't understand. It must be some worse ones out there. If you guys know some worse speeches out there that he was just getting it in and being like totally derogatory, you guys let me know. Drop them in the chat. If you want to come in and speak on it, you're welcome to come in. But that, I don't see that that's worth banning. I don't see that was worth censoring. But you already know it's certain people that you can't criticize in public, right? We all know that. And there's a saying, if you want to know who the enemy is or who's the people that's oppressing you, just figure it out. Just figure out who it is that you can't critique, right? And I'm not saying that it's those people, but damn, everybody else can get talked about, to the moon and back. right? But there's a certain people that you just cannot talk about, right? Why the hell is that? You know? And it's just crazy, man. It's just crazy. And again, I'm not for the A side. I'm not for the J side. I'm just trying to examine the man's rhetoric because I've never heard this before. I just heard it live for the first time today, and I expected something totally different. The book that I read on H, like back in the day, it was a good book. It really was a good book, and it was really jarring. It kind of opened up my mind a lot from what we get told what H was about and what he was trying to do for his people. Like I felt like he was just really, really passionate about his people, right? And I don't want to say regardless of the atrocities that he did to those other people, because I wouldn't want that done to my people or nobody else's people, but war is war, you know? And and that's the thing. People want to look at the way he waged war on people who he thought was subverting this country and say that's not the way you do it. But people commit war crimes every day, right? And hide them. Ours are just not publicized, right? You know, there's no rules in war, even though there are so-called rules of engagement, right? That are supposed to be the kind of the unwritten rules. You ain't supposed to use like a mustard gas. You ain't supposed to kill the women and children, delete the women and children. You're not supposed to bomb hospitals. They do it every time and all the time if they have to. Look at what's going on right now over there, right? That's one of the things that they're complaining about. They're bombing the hospitals. Well, it's war, duh. If somebody really trying to get at you, you think they're not going to do that? So whenever I look at this situation and I be like, and I see people judging him on how he handled those peoples and at a time of war, it's just silly, right? You know, even my people or anybody else's people, like if war is war, it ain't no rules. I thought it was very interesting how he talked about the two-party system being, you know, an illusion. How there's people playing both sides on the same accord, but just giving the illusion to the masses that, you know, you have two opposing sides. That's some of the same gripes we have today. At least my gripe, right? Some people are passionate about this democracy, but do we have it really? Do we really have a democracy? Some people seem to think so, but they must not know what a democracy is, right? Like, I don't think we have a democracy. I really don't. I don't know what the hell it is that we have, right? I know we call it a democracy. Some people call it a constitutional republic. Some people call it a republic democracy. Some people call it, you know, all kind of mess, right? The Constitution says we're guaranteed a republic. So how the hell can we be guaranteed a republic in the thing that's supposed to be the law of the land and nothing supersedes it, but yet our heads of state, even our presidents, talk about going and democratizing the world, right? So you just know it just don't make sense to me. It just really doesn't. And I'm not saying that you know, America is a bad place either, right? It's better than a lot of places, but you just have to, it's like picking your poison, right? We just you know how I see it, we just comfortable slaves, right? You know, we just slaves that they let have a lot of luxury, so-called luxuries, and we welcome our slavery because we get to enjoy the things we get for our labor, right? And so instead of somebody just taking all your labor, right, they give you back some wages for your labor, not enough to do anything, and then you're content with your slavery, right? Because you can buy some tools and fuels, you can live comfortably, but every morning you got to get your ass up and hit that plantation, regardless, you know. So it's changed. Things have changed superficially, but in principle, it's still the same. Everything is going up top. Everything's being shot up top. everything is coming down from the top, right? Interesting. Well, if don't nobody want to come in, I'm gonna get off. I'll probably come back in tomorrow and probably get back on it. Probably do a review on another one of his speeches. I have always been, super curious about his speeches and what it is that he was saying. I've always been, open-minded about what he was doing, not necessarily what he was doing or how he was doing it, but just open-minded because, the winners get to write history, right? And there's so much conspiracy about that time, right? There's so much conspiracy. Like, we don't know what was going on. You can read 20 books about the subject and you'll get 20 different perspectives on what was going on at that time and why, and you will be none the brighter of the situation, right? You'll have a lot of knowledge about it, but you don't know if that knowledge is what it is, right? How do you substantiate it, right? I'll even be leery of the things that they be letting out like 20 later, you'll do like Freedom of Information Acts on certain things that happen in certain periods of time, and they'll be like, it's sealed for 20 years. And then 20 years later, they let out these things, and I still be like, how do we even know that this is even the real thing? And then certain things still be retracted. They'll have Freedom of Information Acts, and then I'll have things marked out in black ink that you still can't see. You know what I mean? Like, war is just one of those things that you'll never know if you on the right side of history, right? And not even on the right side of history, I would say on God's side, because everybody believes that they're on God's side, right? There's one of my favorite movies is called Hero. Quentin Tarantino directed it, right? And it's a martial arts movie. And this movie is about this, this emperor that's over in China, Asia, right? And this emperor is taking over all these different provinces, right? He's going and he's just warring against everybody. So he's kicking everybody's butt. And like all these small provinces hate him. They're like, man, this dude is coming to take our land. What is this guy doing? So, these people came up with a plan to get at the emperor. And finally, one of the guys get to the emperor at the end. And he asked him, he's like, why are you doing all this? But before I delete you, just let me know, why are you causing all this chaos? The emperor said, listen, our country is divided. We speak so many different languages that we can't even do commerce. We got 15 different languages, 15 different countries. We all on the same landmass and we can't even speak with each other. He says, I'm uniting us, right? I'm making it to where we all speak the same language. I'm making it to where we can do commerce with each other. And besides that, there's an enemy that's coming across the water that if we are not united, we will not be here anymore. So the guy that came to delete him had to let him live, right? Because the emperor turned out to be the hero, even though these other guys ended up had to be casualties, right? In order for the greater good to come about. But the emperor was actually maybe doing the just thing. So I always think about that when I think about who was on the right side of history, right? Who was doing the right thing, right? And then I have personal conversations with people in my life who has been to war and told me that the things that they were doing were not just things, that the things that they were doing, they was just getting told to do and they had to do them, right? That the things that they tell us through the propaganda is not really what's going on over there at the time, right? So I take these things in consideration, right? I have to, in order to be the best me I can be, in order to guard my mind and my heart, because people don't even believe that people will use religion against them, right? The most sincere sounding people, people don't believe that. that they can be going to church and getting robbed, right? That people, from people who have bad intentions, that are great actors, right? You got to guard your mind and your heart, man, and be astute and do your own studies. And this is why I'm listening to Hitler, right? Because I want to use my own discernment. Why can't I use my own discernment? So you're just going to just block this part out of history and say, no, it's too negative for people to hear. I ain't never did that with nothing else. So, then it's time to, try to get to it, listen to it. If the government is telling you, there's a speech that you can't hear, you probably want to listen to it, right? It just don't make no sense. Anyhow, I'm out of here. This is due diligence. This is the principles. Peace.